For 4,000 years, ruled Mesopotamia as humanity's first empire. Then, in the span of centuries, a river simply walked away and took an entire civilization with it. At its peak around 2100 BCE, was not merely a city. It was the center of the world's first empire, home to nearly 65,000 people packed into mud-brick neighborhoods that stretched across 6 square kilometers. The Euphrates River ran directly through it, turning into a port of staggering importance. Boats arrived daily from the Persian Gulf, 240 kilometers south, carrying cedar wood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, and shells that would become jewelry and currency. The city had streets. It had markets. It had drainage systems. King Urnammu built the Great Ziggurat around 2100 BCE, a 61-meter tower that rose in 3 tiers, visible across the desert, a declaration that Ur's gods lived here and Ur's king answered to them. Below it lay the royal cemetery, where queens were buried with retinues of attendants, some evidence suggesting the attendants died with them, their bones mixed with gold and harps in shafts dug 15 meters into the earth. Scribes filled clay tablets with lists, harvests, debts, prayers, the texture of daily administration. Cuneiform writing itself was refined here, the wedge marks pressed by stylus into wet clay becoming the ledger of an entire society. For 2 millennia, endured. Dynasties fell and rose. Empires conquered it and moved on. But the city remained because the river remained, delivering fresh water and connecting to trade networks that fed its treasury and its population. The Euphrates was Ur's arterial system, carrying oxygen to every quarter. No river meant no By 500 BCE, that equation would become a death sentence, though nobody living then could have predicted it. What nobody saw coming was how slowly the river would leave. The Euphrates didn't abandon overnight. It left like a guest who stops visiting, gradually, then suddenly. Between 500 BCE and 1000 CE, the river's course shifted eastward, in increments no single generation would recognize as catastrophic. A few kilometers per century. Barely perceptible, but perceptible enough that by 900 BCE, Ur's harbor, once thronged with merchant vessels from the Persian Gulf, began to silt. The waterfront that had made wealthy for 3,000 years was becoming a swamp. Then a mudflat. Then nothing. No one wrote about it as a crisis. There are no cuneiform tablets crying alarm. No royal decrees commanding engineers to dig new canals. The silence itself is the evidence. Between the reign of Nebuchadnezzar Roman II in 605 BCE and the historical record's next clear mention of around 500 BCE, the city's administrative correspondence simply stops. The letters cease. The accounts vanish. What we know comes not from Ur's own records, but from what geologists have since learned about the Euphrates' relentless migration, a movement driven by water seeking the easiest path downslope, indifferent to the civilizations staked along its banks. The merchants stayed longer than logic dictated. Trade is habit. Cities are stubborn. For centuries, Ur's traders probably traveled further inland to reach the river's new channels, paying higher transport costs, accepting longer delays. But every year, the calculus worsened. Every year, the water moved further away. By 1000 C, was no longer a port city at all. It was an inland settlement 25 kilometers from the sea. The thing that made its access to water and world trade, was simply gone. What few inhabitants remained would face a choice that the records show they ultimately made: stay in a city built for a river that no longer arrived, or leave. The Euphrates didn't announce its betrayal. Between 500 BCE and 200 BCE, the river began to shift, not in a flood or a violent rupture, but in the slow arithmetic of erosion and alluvial drift. Year by year, the channel moved eastward. By 200 BCE, it had relocated 25 kilometers from Ur's docks. A city built entirely around water access, around the promise that boats would arrive, suddenly faced a choice it could not survive. The first abandonment was not the last. Ur's population, which had peaked at 65,000 during the Kassite period around 1400 BCE, had already declined. By the time the Euphrates began its migration, the city was perhaps 20,000 strong, still substantial, but fragile. Without river trade, without irrigation channels fed by reliable water, the economic machinery that sustained it simply stopped. Merchants chose other ports. Farmers chose other fields. The collapse was not instant. It was generational. By 100 BCE, cuneiform records from the city thin to almost nothing. The written voice of Ur grows quiet. By 1C, the city was largely abandoned. A few structures remained occupied through the Islamic period, as late as 1800 CE, but they were inhabited by shepherds and small garrisons, not the citizens of an empire. Ur had become a ruin while still partially standing, a ghost city while people still walked its streets. What remained was not a crater, not ash, not bones. It was absence. An empty port. Silent temples. Brick walls slowly dissolving into the desert they had conquered 1,000 years before. Archaeology would much later prove the city's existence, would excavate its treasures, but for nearly 2,000 years, Ur was simply gone from human memory, so completely erased that when the explorer William Loftus first identified its location in 1849, he had to piece together clues from ancient texts and local legends. The real question was not why Ur vanished, but why anyone would ever think to look for it again. When the Euphrates turned away, 65,000 people had nowhere to go. The river that built Ur didn't destroy it, it simply abandoned it, leaving behind a void that swallowed an entire civilization from living memory. Within centuries, no one remembered the city existed at all. The scripts stopped. The merchants packed their boats and sailed toward new ports. The priests left the ziggurat unanswered. By 1000 C, Ur was a ghost that no one could name. Arab geographers who passed nearby saw only a mound of sun-hardened brick rising from the desert. They called it a ruin, but didn't know whose. Local Bedouin tribes camped among the rubble, unaware they walked on the bones of empire. For 800 years, Ur left no mark on history. No songs recalled it. No travelers sought it. It became a blank space on maps. A what if? A civilization so completely erased that medieval scholars debated whether it had ever truly existed at all. Then, in 1849, a British archaeologist named William Loftus stood at the edge of a mound in southern Iraq and made a choice that would resurrect the dead. He had read Ur's name in cuneiform tablets in the British Museum. He had studied ancient king lists. He had heard the legend, whispered in Arabic, of a sacred city buried beneath the sand. Everything pointed here. Loftus marked the location. He didn't excavate. Not yet. But he knew. And what he knew would soon unleash a fever of discovery that would pull Ur from oblivion and reveal a secret the mud brick had kept hidden for nearly 2 millennia. Evidence of something far older, far stranger, buried in the deepest tombs. What Leonard Woolley found in Ur's royal tombs between 1922 and 1934 was not just a dead city. It was a message written in bone, gold, and imported lapis lazuli. The Great Death Pit alone held 74 skeletons, arranged with deliberate precision, their bodies adorned with harps and headdresses, suggesting ritual sacrifice on a scale unseen in the ancient Near East. Woolley's meticulous excavations exposed mud brick houses stacked 6 stories high, cuneiform tablets recording beer rations and land sales, and a ziggurat so monumental it dominated the horizon for 25 kilometers. The Ernamu ziggurat still stands 21 meters tall today, its ramps and platforms intact, a geometric sermon in baked earth. What Woolley revealed confirmed something historians had only suspected. Was real. The Bible named it Ur of the Chaldees, Abraham's birthplace. The Sumerians had called it Urim, seat of the moon god. Between 2100 and 1900 BCE, it was the wealthiest port on Earth. But the excavations also posed questions Woolley could not answer. Why were those 74 people arranged so carefully? What ritual demanded such precision? And deeper still, why did an entire civilization abandon the greatest city it had ever built without a single conquest, without a single sack? Today, remains in southern Iraq, frozen at 96 degrees N, 46, 10 degrees E, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 2016. The mud brick has survived 500 years of abandonment. The tablets remain legible. The tombs still hold their dead. But Woolley's most controversial discovery, one that would reshape how we understand Ur's fall, lay buried beneath layers he never fully excavated, waiting in the waterlogged soil where the Euphrates once flowed, evidence of something that occurred centuries before the river shifted, something that suggested Ur's greatest vulnerability was not hydrology, but geography, not conquest, erased one of history's greatest cities from existence. Another file is already open, the case of how entire empires vanish without a trace. Subscribe to the archive.